So
let's do it. I'm excited.
Okay, so Ram is a design director, two-time author, speaker, CreativeLive Instructor, decision-making coach, approved advisor based in Sydney. He specializes in human-centered design, creative strategy, digital marketing, and branding. For 16 years, he's worked for global agencies including Ogilvy Mather, DDB, JWT, McCann, Saatchi and Saatchi. And he's worked with clients like Audi, McDonald's, Google, AMEX, CBA, Toyota, Louis Vuitton Group. Quick side note, I was looking at your portfolio on your website this morning, and I love that what you designed for McDonald's in Australia said you get a free small Coke and fries, because it's like the opposite of the American super size. People would be like, what the hell, a free small Coke and fries? But in Australia, I guess that's like, I was like, that's pretty incredible. He has been featured in Apple, news.com.au, GE, How Magazine, Herman Miller. His podcast, Giant Thinkers, is a number 3 top podcast worldwide with 250,000 active listeners, which is bananas. That's the technical term for that. Okay, and as I said, for everyone here, we're definitely going to make this an interactive Q&A this morning. I will share Ram, I promise. But there are so many things we could talk about. Your personal journey to reach such a level in design, and then your passion for throwing the rope back and helping others find mentorship is something we can talk about. Human-centered design, we're definitely going to talk about that, because I find that so interesting. You know, everything that you know around brand strategy, podcasting. I mean, and I have to say again to everyone listening, part of why I'm such a fan of Rams is that I feel like that whole like I'm also a member. Like, I also call Ram for advice. Like, I'm also like a true fan IRL. But here's where I was thinking I'd like to start this morning, because this is something that I find really interesting, is that I'm actually new to the term human-centered design. I recently met another friend who's in it as well. The segment that you did where you broke it down and explained it on Clubhouse was really impactful for me. It's a new term for me. So originally when you were saying that you specialize in design and branding strategy and everything else, I had thought of design in more of an artistic sense. But I'm starting to understand from you that human-centered design is problem solving. And here's kind of where I landed on it and where I wanted to start this morning and get your read on this ridiculous analogy and if it makes sense. So I kind of feel like, as someone who's in the world of, marketing and, brand and creative strategy myself, I'm kind of realizing I'm thinking of this like a bowl of ice cream. And I'm thinking of it like, maybe branding is like chocolate ice cream and marketing strategy is vanilla ice cream, and human-centered design, like you make it the whole sundae. Is that like a fair, because I'm looking at your portfolio and I'm trying to parse out, well, what's the brand strategy and what's the marketing strategy and what's the human-centered design? Are they all symbiotic? Do they build on each other? Does every one necessarily mean the other? Can you do one without the other? So can you break down all of those pieces and whether or not that's a fair or ridiculous analogy?
That's the first time I've heard of that, and now that I think of it, it's definitely a fair analogy, Sarah. It's making that sundae while asking everyone involved for their opinion. And so now we get into not just what flavors can be chosen or should be chosen, but how big is the cup and what shape is the sundae cup?
Is it in Australia, so it's small, or is it in America, so it has to be massive?
Right. And so the fundamental principle that you said there was problem solving. It's true. A few layers deep, let's just go one layer deep.
Yeah.
It's co-designing. Okay. A lot of the times, business owners or brands or anyone that wants to create something is doing so without the voice representation of everyone involved. And so a lot of businesses out there are churning out products and services that are not human-centered, that are not co-designing. They're not designing with, they're designing to. And so when we break up the 5-part process, very simply, that I did expand on in Clubhouse, was that there is an empathy phase where we are purely understanding the person. That's it. You're not bringing any bias. You're not introducing any context. You're just understanding the person. From understanding, in the first phase of empathy, what's going to arise? Problems.
Wait, can I pause you
So,
right there? People who get it wrong, is it because that they never start there? Is it because they start at a different point in the process? Is that the difference between human-centered and not human-centered? Because I think that some people would say, we're all humans. I'm a human. My customer is a human. It's impossible that my design isn't human-centered. So is that like, is it when people try and start at step 3 or step 4 that they miss the boat because they don't start with empathy?
correct. And remember, I just said to you that it involves everyone. It's not even just about customer centered. That's why we say human centered, because it involves your leadership team, your employees, it involves your community, it involves your stakeholders. It's not just about even the customers, because the customers, well, even that, right? A lot of people are not looking deeper into the who. I'll give you one example real quick just to insert here. I've gone through this empathy phase with a digital health clinic that is one of my clients. We just finished working together for the last 2 months, Sarah, and everyone here on Fireside. The digital health clinic started 6 years ago, primarily to help Aussie blokes, Aussie men with health problems. The service is doctor-led telehealth. Then they ship a box of medication. They started with hair loss problems, sexual health problems, psychology problems, skincare problems, and they asked me to investigate how they can launch a product for weight loss for Australian men. They said, Ram, we also want this to be holistic, a holistic approach to weight loss. When I started interviewing, which is the empathy phase, you're just understanding. Sorry, there is literally a plane going right above me right now. It's flying over.
It's good. It's real nice. We love it.
Okay. So the interviews that I had with these Aussie guys, you know what they said? Ram, sorry, I just have to stop you there, mate, but what do you mean by holistic? They didn't even know what holistic meant. So lesson insight number 1 is we're on university level with what we think is going to be beneficial to the market, down to shared vocabulary. And yet the market is in preschool or kindergarten level. And these Aussie guys had no idea what I was even talking about when I thought holistic was really simple.
Well, and
It wasn't.
and again, and we are going to break each piece down to like a very base level, because I actually do feel like human-centered design is it is elusive, I think, for a lot of us. I don't know why more of us in marketing aren't focused on it. And so you said 2 things there that I want to hit on. One, again, me from a marketing background, we say, speak in the language of your customer. Don't use jargon. So like that's another thing that really overlaps for me. And that's something I'm really fascinated in this discussion is where are the overlaps? Where are the things that I either don't even realize I'm doing, which is great, or need to be doing, which is important. And then the other question that I had for you that you raised when you were saying it's not just about your customer is the advice speak to your ideal customer, speak to your ideal client avatar, therefore bad advice because it's not expansive enough? Or is it just for a later step in the process?
So, correct. So, what you always have to start with is a hypothesis that is gathered from desk research, from your lived experience. You always have to start with that. But even with these terms, avatar, persona, we call the very early stage as a proto persona. It's not even a full blown persona. What I'm getting at is that in this design, human centered design process, it's iterative, It's back and forth.
Mm.
That's why Facebook updates every 5 seconds. That's why things change all the time. And so the ones that use human-centered design understand that every bit of information constantly feeds the decision making for what they do to improve, what they do to delete or to increase or to decrease in whatever activities that they have.
Ram, I'm getting excited here. I'm getting excited for a minute. This is why I love conversations like this. So what I feel like I'm hearing from you is that human-centered design, in a lot of ways, if I'm getting it right, it's a precursor. It's the pre-work that everyone's skipping when they just jump to the marketing and the branding strategy. It's actually not another scoop on the Sunday. It's an ingredient that we're missing, right?
So absolutely. How about this, Sarah? Okay, so back to that digital health clinic. Okay,
Yeah.
The business that I was helping do this piece of work for, which is the let's call it hypothesis validation work.
Oh, that's not jargony at all.
Right? It's I
Proving
know. I'm sorry.
assumptions, maybe testing their
Yes.
assumptions for everyone in the
Testing
room.
their assumptions.
Okay.
So the business thought that it was just Aussie guys. You either were overweight or you weren't. Okay? This is very common. You either have the problem or you don't. But here is the fascinating thing that I was able to uncover. We found 5 different customer segments. I'm only going to share 3 because it gets the point across. But we found, let's call the first customer segment being a persona, let's use that word, or avatar, was Performance Pete. Performance Pete had these characteristics and attributes. Was already a shredded Adonis, couldn't imagine how they were going to lose more weight, but they did want to lose weight in their minds because they are high performers. They were the CrossFitters, they were doing like marathons, whatever, right?
They noticed
Then there
that
was
3 pounds of water weight that's going to affect their 2 seconds in the pool with the,
Exactly. So they still valid to be a segment that is also motivated by losing weight, plain and simple. Then there was another segment, which was Dad Bod Dave, let's call him. And Dad Bod Dave this is the narrative. I was always fit in school, in university, and even when I started my early career, I was always working out. But then I had my first kid, then my second kid's on the way, and I've put on a bit of weight. They want to lose weight as well. Now let's go to the other end. A third segment I'll mention is an obese Oliver, let's call him, okay? An obese Oliver was 30 BMI and above, like clinically obese, was presenting specific health problems, right? So we're talking diabetes, inflammation, we're talking psychological down spiraling. We're talking panic attacks, anxiety. He was saying things like, Ram, I can't even recognize myself anymore. I'm in such a dark place. I don't even know where to begin. So now here we go. Now we have all this information. It totally saves us all the amount of assumption, amount of work. It saves you so much of whatever you're doing, strategic initiatives, marketing, tactics. It guides you now on a particular focus, which is the second phase. So we've gone from empathy, we're understanding. The second phase is
Wait, can I ask you one
define.
more question in phase 1 before we move on? Because I really want to get really granular. Is that okay? Is that okay? So
Yes,
I have one other question for you in phase 1, because I actually can really resonate with this example from a woman's health perspective, because I'm very entrenched in the fitness space for women. And there's a large discussion, especially in this country right now, I don't know if it's going on in Australia, around diet culture. And so, for example, if you were going to launch a fitness product for women, you would need to really know if your client was aesthetically focused and thought that talking about a bikini body was aspirational, or if they're anti-diet culture. If they find that restrictive, if they think that that's harmful, you would never want to go down that path. And you would only want to talk about strength and health and wellness. So one question I have for you in the empathy stage is, it sounds to me like research, which is a term that you mentioned earlier. How do you figure out who that person is successfully? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you ascertain what who those avatars are, what their needs are?
Yeah. So here we go. We gather a diverse range of worldview from different voices, different circumstances, different types of people. We then have, from a business point of view, a limited amount of resources, of capability, but also a specific set of expertise, right? So we need to take all that information. There is a massive plane again over my head. Okay, it's passing. Apologies. So we take all of that, we take all of that information, and this does lead to the second phase. It is about scoring which problems are the most important to solve. Okay? Everything that you find of what we call what's said should be gathered, whether it's a post-it, whether you transcribe the interview. There is a synthesizing phase where you're getting what's said, those wonderful nuggets, those beautiful quotes that I just sort of played back to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, that's a valid insight. That's another valid insight. Then you arrive at these themes, these problem themes. And let me give you an example.
Yeah.
When the business was on my case and they were like, holistic. And I said, it's holistic to a point. But when I spoke to the obese Oliver, this type of gentleman had already exhausted ready-made meals, had already exhausted meal replacements, had already exhausted shakes. They are in such a massive problem. They need psychological support, and they also need medication, right? Like, they have serious health problems we're talking about. Now, on the other end, at Dad Bod Dave, let's say, when I mentioned even the mention of, look, there is a product on the market to help you lose weight. It's an injectable. It's used for diabetes, but it's now regulated and available to you. Would you use it? He's like, oh, nah, mate, I would never use that. Like, why? I don't need to inject anything. I don't want to take pills. I don't want to take medication. And so that person, a Dad Bod Dave, was more primed to have a meal replacement because the lifestyle and the now, I don't want to use too much jargon, but I've coined this proportional problem solving.
Yep.
The spectrum of pain needs to be proportional now to the problem. You and I wouldn't go and buy a chainsaw just to trim a rose bush, would we, Sarah?
Yeah.
You wouldn't. What do you use a chainsaw for?
Chopping wood, right?
Wood, a tree, right? I'm not going to trim.
I've never used a chainsaw.
I'm not going to use a chainsaw for this little branch.
Yeah.
Right? I'll use a garden trimmer. I'm not putting you on the spot with your chainsaw skills, Sarah.
That's not on my wheelhouse. No, but and then I promise I'll let you move on to step 2. You just, to kind of tie a bow on a few things you said that really stood out to me, because I love the fact, even if all that we do in this hour is break down the 5 steps, I really think we're going to help some people listening. I'm super excited about it. The first thing you said that I really appreciate is this idea of almost gathering all worldviews and then going back through the highlighter. And again, that's my kind of running it through my brain, as opposed to saying, this is my assumption about who my ideal client or customer is, and I'm going to only speak to them, and I'm going to look for things that validate the preconceived notions I already have. So I think that was really powerful. And then the other thing that I would say to people listening who are kind of new to this, that I think is really important, is I think sometimes new entrepreneurs or new marketers think that they're only allowed to have one ideal customer or ideal client avatar. But they don't think about the fact that like successful businesses, as you said, are selling a range of products. So I don't know if you have Lowe's in Australia or Home Improve or whatever, Home Depot, any of those kinds of stores, as you're saying, they're going to sell all of it. They're going to sell garden trimmers and they're going to sell chainsaws, I imagine, and they're going to sell all of the different things because they know that the person like me who's only going to be like trimming like a little thing in their front yard because they have like 4 bushes is a different person than someone who has a garden, than someone who has acres of land. And those different people are going to need different products. And if you're a lawn and garden store, you can have the spectrum and speak to a different customer. So I think that that's a really powerful, just a lot of powerful points, but I do want to let you get to points 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah. So point 2, and I've kind of described a bit about that, but point 2 is define as a one word, define. But what that really means is define problem statements. Now, whether you're a business owner or you're an aspiring entrepreneur, or you want to launch your own small business or a product even, you've got to get clear on what, everyone knows what problem are you solving, what is your customers' pain points, but you really have to list every problem as a statement. And then you have to score which problem statement is worth addressing first. And this is critical. This can mitigate so much of your overwhelm, your options overload, your thinking of, should I pursue that path or this path? So I'll give you an example, right? I was the lead designer on designing the next 10 years of New South Wales train. So that's like saying, well, how should the next 10 years of the New York City subway look like, or the London Underground? So in Australia, I designed for phase 1 of what that future state train experience should look like. Yeah. Okay, no big deal. It was hard. It was tough.
It's a huge freaking deal. I'll say it for you. It's a huge freaking deal.
It was wild, like almost killed me. But here is a fascinating thing. Okay, the organization, especially when they're a long time organization, they are set in a lot of their ways. They have established employees and a leadership team that's been there for 20, 25 years. That's hard to change people's minds, right? So they, in New South Wales, which is the state with which Sydney is in, there are train stations that are 15 hours away that are not being used. Okay, we call these rural train stations, let's call it. And so there is already a bias from the organization as to why they're not being used.
Or why would we invest in them when they get less traffic and we're thinking per capita and so on and so forth.
Correct. And so they say that, we know why they're not being used. And I said to them, well, why? Why do you think? He said, the main head honcho was like, well, it's not got a man or woman assigned, for a shift, like from, like a 12-hour or 16-hour shift. And so that's the reason why, it feels unsafe. Okay? I go, well, let's ask. Why don't we just ask the community? So we went there and we literally asked all of these different communities in these really like run-of-the-mill, like not well-kept stations. Yeah, scary looking. You felt unsafe. Here is the punchline. When we got there, yes, they were unsafe. That's why they weren't being used. What could be resolved wasn't having a full-time staff member on the train station. You know what they just said?
Lighting.
Ram, we just want lighting, increased lighting, and we want CCTV cameras that are visible and a sign that said 24/7 surveillance. Okay, that's just one example. So you pick which of the problems that from the first phase have come up. You then write them into problem statements and then you score them.
I want
based
to
on
ask you,
quick
oh, sorry,
wins
based
and
on,
all that stuff, right? Right, based on quick wins, because some of them are like minimum effort, maximum impact, right? You will find some quick wins in there, and that's what I would suggest is what you focus on first.
I am going to ask you a question because I'm realizing where I want to go with this is that I want to ask you, I feel like every FAQ that people don't get to ask on these 5 steps. That's what we're doing this hour. So my next question is, I feel like there's a myth, trope, idealistic view that if you work for yourself, you only get to do the work that you want. And so my question for you around this idea that, again, human-centered design, this idea that you score the problems based on, as you're saying, impact, need, ability for quick wins. I imagine that some people would say, well, if I list out 10 problems and there's one I really, 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 really want to work on, how does that affect the scales of where it ranks?
Well, this is where, of course, there's going to be a bit of politics depending on who's involved, right? But you know, you've got to weigh in as professional and as anchored in on the first phase as you can, because what happened was the business, the organization for this transport service, when we played, and this is the beauty of interviews, when we played video snippets, no more than 30 seconds of 20 different people, and you play that back to the leadership team and it's the opposite of what they said, you can't argue with the human being that you
What
are
was their
creating.
reaction?
It was mind blowing, honestly. I'm not surprised, but it's just always so interesting to watch because you're not sticking it in their face. You're just presenting the facts. And this is the problem with bias, that people are not, and that's something I want to talk about probably more so in other content platforms, including maybe Fireside in future. But, bias means that you're introducing your worldview and it is only at most half of the truth. Because when people are designing whatever products, services, businesses that don't bring in the underrepresented, not only do you have an outdated product, service, or business, you've designed a product or service or business that's 2 years ago at best, when we need to be designing for 2 years ahead.
I mean, that's a mic drop. If anyone's here, you better drop a reaction for that. That was really, really strong. And thank you. I mean, that was strong. There are 2 things too, Ram, that makes me think of. The first is so I don't know if you know, my very first job was in the nonprofit sector. I worked at the National Nonprofit for the UN Refugee Agency. And
Oh, wow.
one of the, I always get this word wrong because it's not called a proverb, but it's like the story that tells you something. I always forget what that word is. But one of the stories that you're told is the story of the well-meaning nonprofit that goes to the community where the women walk miles for water every day and put in a well, and end up actually destroying the community because it turns out that they're like, oh, we brought them water. Aren't we the best nonprofit in the world? But that the entire kind of social structure and everything else revolved around the fact that the women all walked to the well every day and what they did there and what they talked about and what happened culturally. And to your point, no one took the time to ascertain kind of what it was just like this, as I said, this kind of like proverbial example that like, you don't just go throw a well in. You talk to the community about what actually they need. Would there have been something that could have better facilitated the women getting the water that still allowed for kind of these historic structures of how they went about their day and everything that happened to the community and honored the traditionalism is kind of the first thing that I think about when people just almost, infuse themselves into a situation and say, I have the solution without talking to the people. And then on the complete other side of the spectrum, because, one thing that I think is really can be problematic is that sometimes well-meaning white people can conflate kind of underrepresented and minorities and the underserved and like use all of those words synonymously, which couldn't be more inaccurate. And actually, a good friend of mine, I don't know if you know Walt Gear from Clubhouse. He's so brilliant. And he just did that documentary about Black Madison Avenue and how seven is not enough. And I watched the first installment last Friday, and it's these brilliant Black creative directors. And one of them was speaking about how, you know, actually, whenever there's a Black creative director on the team, they win more awards and they're more successful because white people generally write for a white worldview, but Black people are able to write for an expansive worldview, for everyone's worldview, that there's this misnomer that white people write for white people and Black people write for Black people, whatever the case may be, but that when you have this outsider perspective, you can write as everyone because you have to assimilate. You can write for every cultural perspective. And I really feel like, you know, the point that you just made when you were kind of saying that don't just look at the dominant worldview and ignore a community that can actually share everyone's worldview.
Oh, I love that. And I'm a big fan of Walter Greer. He is an acquaintance of mine. We're in that sort of pocket of agency land, so to speak. But, you know, it reminds me of this example of a life-threatening example where there was the invention of parachutes specifically designed for the military, and in its iteration phase, it worked fine, all good. But then, when there was an increase of female military women, they didn't test it on them, right? What happened was that they had created, whoever manufactured these parachutes, they were geared for the physical and the features and the weight and the shape were all designed for a man,
Right.
a white man at that. Long and the short of it is, there was a woman that had a faulty, what they thought was a faulty parachute, but it wasn't. It's just that it wasn't designed for her. It just blows my mind when, and there's other instances of this. There's pacemakers that have been faulty. There's a lot of inventions and designs out there because they've designed with their bias that it should just fit for a man, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just something to consider, which is why, even if you take nothing from this process, just the first phase, empathy equals understanding. You're
And talking
going
to everyone, not just your ideal client. Like, as I said, that for me is like a light bulb that I hope everyone takes away from this, because too often when we minimize marketing for the entrepreneur, the small business owner, we say hone in on your ideal client and we skip past this step. To your point, we actually tell people almost to lean into their bias if we're just like, okay, write down your ideal client avatar. Who are they? What do they like? Go. Without this research stage.
The problem that I have with
and that's going to lead to bias, Ram. If you're just like, who are they? What do they watch? What do they do? What do they like? Go.
I was going to say they're all demographics or markers, let's call them, that are quite surface level. Like I just told you just 3 segments from a weight loss umbrella for Australian men. I just gave you 3 totally different people. And they all are segmented by the type of pain and their circumstance, not age, not even gender,
not how much rugby they watch.
Correct. Not who they listen to, who they follow. It's about the pain based on the spectrum of pain and based on the gain that they want and that they desire.
So I want to I want to actually pull on that thread a little bit more because it's really important to me. Like, I love having discussions up here, but for everyone watching, I always want, as I said, that person who doesn't have a background in marketing, who, if they're having that oh shit moment of like, oh, well, like, I sell, let's keep with fitness. I sell fitness training plans. And I've always been told to pick an ideal customer avatar. And so I had just decided that my ideal customer avatar was me 3 years ago. She just had a baby. She has baby weight to lose. She's frustrated. She's lost herself. She this. I just made an ideal customer avatar that was me. And you've now told me that that's not the right way to go about it. So if I were to give that person, like, here are the 3 steps that you can take today, what would those 3 steps be?
Okay, I'll give you some tools right off the bat. Go to Google Trends. Go to Google Trends. It is a website, and I want you to compare keywords that you're toying up between. So the beautiful thing that they've improved, Google have done, is they've created a free resource of quantifying every search term, and you can see the trend in that search term. So, for example, before this call, I just had a client call and we were tossing up between using the word therapist or coach. And we then found a increasing high trend on the word coach. So that informs us, right? So already use whatever. I searched a term, chia seeds versus chia oil. Chia seeds was on a trend, but so was chia oil. Again, this is going to help validate or invalidate your thinking, your assumption, your hypothesis. So Google Trends. The second thing is, if you really want to get to it, go to somewhere like interviews.com, I think is the site, but there's lots of sites. Recruit 10 people and just talk to them. 10 people in the pocket of what you are hypothesizing.
And so the point just made, though, but I don't want to ask them what they watch, and I don't want to ask them what brand of leggings they wear.
And you're not.
As you're saying, I want to ask them all around their pain points. Why are they unhappy? Why are they, and not even why are they struggling to lose weight, which might be a leading question. But like,
you never do leading questions. So you just open up with, tell me a bit about you. How did you grow up? Start there.
But as you're saying, to hone in on the pain, though, and to get to where I want, would I ask them things like, how do you feel about your body? For if I'm the fitness coach, right? Like things like that.
Yeah. Ask them open questions. How do you feel about your body? And then you really need to keep digging, right? Like there's a few techniques in the interviews, and we're not talking interview techniques as such, but use these as scripts. When someone says something, don't respond with another question right away. Pause and say, what else? Pause and go, anything else? They are going to like vomit all the pain out. It's unbelievable.
I feel terrible smiling when you said that, but like that was a brilliant thing to say.
Always ask, what else?
Yeah.
What else? Anything else? And here's a little technique that you can borrow. If someone says a statement like, oh, look, I've never been able to lose weight because, my body's not built. My body's just not built to be a skinny person, let's just say.
Yeah.
Play that statement back as a question. Your body's not built to be a skinny person? Pause, and they will elaborate. This is just practical stuff, right? We want to get some practical things, but you interview them and uncut and record the interview and just bring to the surface the landscape that you're playing with. you might quickly find that when you wanted to launch a weight loss product or a training program, that what they actually needed was an accountability group. And so your whole business model changes.
Right, because that's what you lead with. That's what then differentiates you in the market, and that's how you beat that that fear and that common problem of I'm one in a million. Why can't I differentiate myself? Why can't I sell my product? Why aren't people coming to me? How do I stand out? You stand out because you've already done the research to learn what people actually need.
Correct. I'll give you one example of one of my businesses. So I have 11 different companies and businesses, okay? One of them is called Unrushed Experiences. Without even knowing what it's about, when you land on the page, it says, we help overworked Sydney-siders undo the damage of busy. I've not said if it's an event, although it is, but now you quickly qualify yourself. And this is because of this method. So I'm not just saying this method because it sounds good. I do this with everything. Every decision that I make.
Well, to me, it also sounds so much like Donna Miller's Building a Story brand of like, if you have that one line that says like, that puts the customer as the hero and says what you do for them, what they gave
Right.
you. Yeah.
But see, I wouldn't have selected such a succinct proposition line, and this overlaps with marketing because marketing's job is to drive awareness and to generate leads and to position this product or service in the marketplace that penetrates and all that stuff. But what I'm getting at is immediately, I'm not leading with what vehicle it is or the features. I'm not saying, oh, this is an ebook or this is a program or it's an event. But I didn't say
Elijah Bowie, who's one of my other favorite humans, always says, you are never sold a flight by seeing the switches in the cockpit and being told how many gallons of gasoline are on the plane. You're told where the plane is going.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so I think, hopefully there's some breakthroughs here happening. And if you're watching this as a replay, but when we go through this method, I'm not just saying pain as a something that you already know. You know what I mean by that. I'm talking about isolating the pain down to the moment that the person can recognize.
Mm-hmm.
That's why at the beginning I said you don't use a chainsaw to cut a rose bush.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different level of pain.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I like about framing it in empathy is another one of my favorite marketers, Anis Ganuna, is really pushing back against predatory marketing, right? This idea that you use pain to target people or to manipulate people. But what I think is really important about this approach, really you can use anything for good or for evil. I like the idea that we're using this for good to solve problems, to help people, to bring, you're not finding their pain so that you can push on it and sell to them. If you solve their problem, they'll buy from you. But the goal is a positive one.
Absolutely right. And so we get to the third phase, which I think is fun for people. It's ideate. So you're coming up with ideas, you're concepting. And so this is very critical because too often, how often, do you hear this? Or maybe you're doing this yourself, or maybe you're on the receiving end where there's a customer or a prospect that goes, I want this. And for me, it looks like, Ram, I want a website. Or Ram, design me an app, which I can absolutely do. But that implies that they've resolved who they're helping, what pain they're experiencing, and that this just happens to be the right thing to create, to build. Mm-hmm. I just got off a call earlier today with a woman who created a dating app. And by the end, she was in tears because she had spent over £100,000. She's a single mum.
Apps are expensive.
Right? And she completely missed the first two phases. She had an idea that was not at all researched from
Mm-hmm.
a decent database. And she positioned this as way too broad, and there was nothing competitive about it, right? Even if you look at, I said to her, even if you look at, Tinder versus eHarmony,
Mm-hmm.
or something more, more, there is a difference. Even that, there is a clarity in the positioning
Yes.
and a clarity on who and what type of behavior each main user would have.
Mm-hmm.
It's clear as day. But there's still dating apps. You could still effectively do the same thing, but one requires more effort to acquire a different quality person.
Mm-hmm.
One is a bit hit and miss, but it's fast, right? And so my point is that please don't go and build something that you haven't first ideated.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to ideating, the ideas have to be relative to the problem statements, which is the
Mm-hmm.
second phase, define problem statements. And then, of course, you can only do that with a strong empathy and understanding phase. So we go from empathy, define problem statements, ideate.
Well, and that's why I'm so glad. And I know you have to go in 9 minutes, so we'll go really fast through the last two, and we'll see if we have time for one question. But I will say that's why I'm so glad that we actually spent so much time on the first two, because I think that's what I'm coming to understand where human-centered design comes into it. Because to your exact point, I think too often well-intentioned business owners and maybe even well-intentioned marketers start in step 3 and they don't even realize that they've missed 2. Because I don't think that she paid no attention to her customer segment. I would imagine that she could have given you a 5-page profile of what she intuited. My customer is a woman or a man. They're not looking for a casual hookup. They're looking for a serious relationship. They're a professional. They this, they this, they this. And she doesn't know why her dating app isn't working. But to your point, it's because she skipped those first 2 pieces. So, but I'm going to let you quickly overview point 4 and 5.
And just real quick on that, we got to the crux of it, and she was in tears. And what she said was, I said, why did you do this? Why did you go this far to build something? And she said, I had a dream, Ram. And that broke my heart, because I was like, this is where you have to separate the facts from the feelings, and you have to listen well. And this is the problem with bias. You can't punt on an idea, a market, a truly validated solution, if you haven't even validated if there is even a market for that type of solution. Okay, so
And
then we go.
dating apps are not a blue ocean; they're a red ocean. There are a million dating apps under the sun. There's like a BuzzFeed article of every niche dating app. Like, so, and I don't know if these are international, but like in the US, there's everything from dating apps for every kind of religion to every kind of profession to health status. You know what I mean? And to your point, so to back to the last question, what pain is she really solving that doesn't have that solved yet, or that people really need? And so I imagine, again, if I'm listening to this and saying, what does this mean for my business? I would hear that if I was taking Ram's advice, I would have gone to the drawing board and tried to interview as many people as possible who are dating, and ask them if they're on dating apps, where they're looking for love, what they're looking for, what's missing, gathered all that information and seen if what I wanted to create was solving for something that didn't exist yet.
Well, what she failed to do was she stopped right at the very largest umbrella. And what I mean by that is she didn't keep going. She stopped at, she goes, Ram, everyone deserves love. Like, at the heart of it, she goes, everyone deserves to find love. And I said, that sounds amazing, but I can't opt in and out of that proposition.
Mm-hmm.
I need to opt in and out very quickly to go, what is the 2, 3, 4 layers on top of that? Right.
And first of all, Ram, we're going to part 2 this to get to 4 and 5 because there's just no way we can, because I know you still have 5 minutes and I have to give people time for Q&A. But here's the other thing that's interesting to me. When you go back to the last example that you gave of the statement that you'd created that was, specifically the solve for busy people, like that instantly is like, I'm an overworked professional. This is going to solve my problem. This idea that everyone deserves love, I think it's really important for us to speak on that. Your vision can be, as you said, too big. Because, for example, this idea that everyone deserves love, that could apply to an adoption agency. That could apply to an adoption agency for children. That could apply to an adoption agency for pets. That
there you go.
apply to
we got you going now, Sarah.
And, I mean, literally, it's so broad, this idea that everyone deserves love. You could have come up with a new school curriculum. You know what I mean? And it just, here's the other thing that I think is interesting is I think sometimes people are fooled by the fact that they look at a successful company with a broad mission statement and they don't realize, again, the difference between probably what's actually driving the product and the interaction with the customer and how it's shown to the world. So for example, like Starbucks does have this very broad, grandiose statement, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's something about building community everywhere you go. And it sounds like a very big, bold, broad, but the fact is that everyone knows that it started on the fact that you were going to get the same cup of coffee everywhere you went.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And so to your point with her, even if it was something everyone deserves love, she needs to have done the research so that she has the tag afterwards. That's even whatever the case may be, widows, even, people on their third marriages, even, people who've never gone on a date because of COVID, even people who are worn out post-pandemic, whatever even, 20-year-olds with no social skills. What is who is she helping?
Yeah, it goes down to niching down to that overlap of there is enough market share.
Yeah.
Because it's underserviced.
Yep.
And the overlap of you going, I can service it really well or better than the current.
And right. And what if the research told her that people who worked 80 hours a week felt that they didn't deserve love, or people on the spectrum felt that they didn't deserve love, or people who, had a failed relationship, or people who hadn't dated in 2 years because of the pandemic. But like you're saying, you can't just assume. You can't assume. It's almost like how I would sum up. That's what I've learned about human-centered design today. You can't just assume because of bias, because you missed the target market, because your language is too broad, and because you jumped to step 3 without steps 1 and 2. And that's what's missing.
Yeah. And by the way, if you're listening, you're probably like, well, but what's step 4 and 5? Well, step 4 and 5.
Come back for part 2 of the interview.
We'll come back. Do you want me to share what 4 and 5?
You can say what they are, but we'll delve into them. I'm going to make you come back, Ram, to do a part 2 for steps 4 and 5. But tell us what they are.
So we've gone from empathy, number 1, we go define problem statements, number 2, and then we go ideate possible solutions to the problem that you've picked. And then the 4th is prototype. And I need to dive into that a little bit another time because it might not be what you think. Cliffhanger, I know. And then the 5th. All right, exactly. And 5th is test and iterate. And this is not a linear journey. I can't stress that enough. It means that you might go back and forth and jump as information becomes available and as information becomes unearthed. Okay, so think about that. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I've got a couple more minutes.
Two quick things because I know you have to jump.
No, I've got a few minutes, Sarah. You've got
yay.
enough.
Okay, one, I appreciate what you said earlier when you said, look at how Facebook and Meta keeps evolving and keeps changing. I think a real disservice that some entrepreneurs do for themselves is that they assume that making changes will make people think that they didn't know everything to start and that that's a weakness. I think that they assume that it makes them look chaotic. I think that they assume that they need to try things for a certain period of time. You know what I mean? Like, it's like there are all of these limiting beliefs around iteration and testing. So I'm super excited for us in a future episode to dig into like what's successful testing versus you don't want to drive your market crazy and be a scatterbrain. So like really talking about both the right way to prototype and the right way to test, I'm super excited about. And then the other thing that I want to save time for, so I'm glad to do a few more minutes. I have on the Fortune Cookie your website, but I want you to tell people what you're working on at this moment that you're really passionate about, where they can find you, how they can get to learn more about you, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, I guess there's two things that I'm really passionate about. The first is because I'd come from 16 years of enterprise level business, creative strategy, branding.
By the way, tell everyone what enterprise level means.
So the clients that I had to lead in Australia were AMEX, Qantas, Toyota, McDonald's, Audi, like global juggernauts. That's enterprise level, where they exist in almost most countries. And I had reached a point in my career where I just was no longer fulfilled with the level of fulfillment, the satisfaction I was getting helping these clients. And so I 3 years ago switched to being an advisor. So I'm an approved advisor here in Australia and globally, and I sit on the advisory board, and that's their formal positions for fintech companies, health tech companies. And so we have conversations like this once a month or more, and we talk about what is it that we're standing on the hilltop and we're going, okay, where do you want to go? How did your last month go? What is the business doing well? What is it not doing well? That type of thing. But then I also found that, hey, I should be able to take this and help small business owners. And so that's what I'm doing. Number one, I'm building my own clientele, advising and business coaching. So you can go to my website and you can book a discovery call, and it's no obligation, and I mean it. So it's that. But then on the other end, something totally different. I really got into tennis in the pandemic, so much so that I couldn't resist putting my business hat on in the tennis world. So that's one of my businesses that I launched as well. It was tennis related. It's basically 3-hour boot camps for adult beginners. Anyway, it's gone off. There's like 6,000 members now, and that all happened in a year and a half. And I've built a business with a former Spanish guy who's my coach, formerly a good friend of Nadal, and he grew up with him. And I was actually interviewed Patrick Mouratoglou, Serena Williams' coach, last week. And
wow.
My goal is to build Australia's first and most innovative indoor tennis facility. That's my dream right now. And I'm going big, And again, like you're able to take these methods and you're able to apply it in any industry.
And one of the things I want us to talk about in part 2 of your interview, which we're going to schedule soon, is I remember you telling the story of how you landed on 3-hour boot camps. And like that to me is another really interesting example of your methodology and practice, because we make assumptions. Wouldn't people just want to come for an hour a week for 3 months? Wouldn't people want to spend a weekend? Wouldn't people want to this? Wouldn't people want to that? We look at our biases. We look at our own schedule. We look at how things have always been done. But the way that you came about figuring out this is what people want, which is allowing you to fast track that success, is a perfect example of what you were talking about earlier.
Well, let me just quickly say like the super short version of how I even got to that idea, because I want people to feel like they can do it themselves.
Yeah.
So I took up tennis with 2 options: group coaching for 1 hour or 1 hour private. That's what's available in the market, any club, anywhere in the world, right? I realized that 1 hour, A, wasn't enough, And B, it wasn't an effective use of my time because I'm an
Because you have
adult.
to drive there, you have to change your clothes, you have to check in, you have to park. That's why I always say I work out at home, because your workout is as long as the drive there, the BSing with the person at the front desk, the changing in the locker room, and then doing that all on the flip. 100%.
Exactly. And then my observation, coming from the outside, never was involved with tennis. I observed that the group sessions were all kids. Okay. So then I said to my coach,
I'm just picturing you learning tennis with a bunch of 9-year-olds. Continue.
exactly. And they've beaten me. It's hilarious, but I give it a go. So I speak to my coach and I said, what else is available for adults? And he said, well, that's it. There's nothing. There's these retreats, but again, they're for kids as well. Like they're the summer camps and stuff. And I said, so you're telling me that there's nothing like over an hour, like a 3-hour boot camp, but there are for like boxing and training and weight loss, but there's nothing for tennis, like a boot camp. He said, nothing. I researched, I interviewed people, I did exactly what I've told you. And then I said, can we just try something? We haven't built a single thing yet. I don't know if you have this Eventbrite, but we have Eventbrite. I go on Eventbrite and I post $100 per person, 3 adults, adult beginner tennis boot camps in Sydney. We sold in 24 hours. Sold out. 10 spots, $100, just as a test, right?
Step
And
5.
yes. And then we're like, we haven't even done anything. We've not even created anything. We just put up a page on Eventbrite and it sold out. So then we're like, let's put up another one. That sold out again. My point is, we identified a market need because A, sample size of 1, sure, but I validated it. So there you go.
That's amazing. Well, I think that's the perfect note to end on. I also want to tell people to subscribe to the Giant Thinkers podcast, which is extraordinary. I'm subscribed. It's an excellent, excellent podcast. And I just want to thank you for your time this morning for me, this evening for you. This was a lot of fun. And we are going to schedule part 2 because I wrangled you into that. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, let's do it. I honestly appreciate you, Sarah, for inviting me, introducing me to Fireside. I love you to bits, and I just hope that people continue to engage with you as well, because you're just such a giver, and you're such a wealth of knowledge and connecting people, and there's only good that comes out of interacting with you. So thank you so much. I very much adore you, and thanks everyone for listening and for hanging out.
Well, it's so mutual. I'm such a fan of yours. I learned from you. I love you. I appreciate you. Thank you for your time today. I'm going to sign off here, and everyone, definitely make sure you share out the replay because this was a really good hour. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.